Hello, I love trolls, and previously on this channel I've made 3 trolls, or perhaps 2, depending on how you want to see it. And since the internet is already filled with trolls, I figured, I guess 2 more trolls won't hurt. Alright, so here's the plan. I'm gonna make Mama Troll being out and about in the forest, trying to teach her little rascal of a kid the importance of picking only the best mushrooms, but her kid is more intrigued by his mama's tale than picking mushrooms. Oh well, I started off by sculpting Mama Troll, since Mama Troll is gonna be the centerpiece of this diorama, and that way it would become much easier to determine how big or perhaps small I was gonna make the baby troll. So I started by building up the armature with some clay, while I was thinking about the proportions of the troll. That's what I like about trolls, you know, they come in all different kinds of shapes and sizes, and I wanted this one to be a little bit on the stubby side, but still quite muscular. But at this stage I was only thinking about getting the general shape right, before I started to add any more details to the body. In case you were wondering about the stylistic decisions as well as the inspiration for this troll, well, don't be fooled by my impeccable American accent. No, I'm actually from Sweden, and many years ago I played a Swedish role-playing game called Trudvang, which is a fantasy game quite heavily influenced by Nordic folklore and mythology. And those rulebooks had some of the best illustrations of trolls, in my opinion, created by artists like Paul Bonner and Alvar Tapia. So their illustrations, as well as some of the paintings by the Swedish artist John Bauer, was the inspiration for this build. When the shoes were done, then I finished up the bottom part of the sculpture by adding some more details to the knees, as well as poking some texture on the legs. And then it was time to make a head, because I felt like I needed to get the head in place quite early in the process to be able to get a better idea of how the troll was gonna turn out in the end. And I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted the face to look like. You know, a face that's 90% nose and a mouth with poor dental hygiene. Nothing crazy, just your average troll, I guess. And when the head had been attached to the rest of the body, then I made a pair of ears looking like Master Yoda's but upside down that I attached on each side of the head. And since trolls do like their bling, I decided to add a ring to one of the ears. I gave the arms on Mama Troll a bit more of a muscular appearance, because I would imagine that carrying a family would give you a nice set of guns. And then I draped her body in some clay fabric of the ragtagier kind that I had texturized with a real piece of fabric off camera. It's a little hard to see the texture right now, but it showed up quite clearly when I started to paint. To make sure Mama Troll's clothes wouldn't be flopping around too much all over the place, I secured them with a pretty thick clay rope I wrapped around her waist, before poking a little bit more on the rope to make it look a bit more like a rope, I guess. But just a rope won't do the trick, so I also added some small threads in between all of the individual pieces of fabric. I wasn't done with the head just yet. No, I still needed to make some hair, and I thought it would be quite appropriate to give her some nice braids. So I attached them on each side of the head before blending them in with the rest of the hair, as well as giving it some more details. And I also gave Mama Troll a nice necklace with a rocket end of it. As previously mentioned, Mama Troll is out in the forest trying to teach her kid the importance of picking a nice mushroom, and I wanted her to be holding a mushroom in one of her hands. So I made a hand, and I also made the mushroom. And the mushroom of choice would of course be a death cap, or flugsvamp as we say in Sweden. I realized the forearm was a little bit too long, so I removed some clay before adding her a gargantuan hand, and of course giving her a really nice bracelet. In her right hand she'd be holding on to a leather sack to keep all of her mushrooms in, so I made her hand grip around the sack. And if you're only listening to audio, it's not what it sounds like, okay? Anyways, to finish up the sculpture I added a little rock knife that I'd made off camera. And then Mama Troll was done, except for her tail, which her kid is gonna be holding on to. So let's make Baby Troll. I started by bending a little piece of aluminum wire before drilling some holes in my cork sculpting handle and attaching it to it. Then wrapping some more armature wire around it that would become the arms, as well as adding a little bit of aluminum foil. I added the first initial layer of clay onto the entire thing, and since pretty much all of it would be covered up later on, I wasn't too worried about getting it super smooth. I attached a clay ball as a head, as well as giving Baby Troll a big old nose just like his mama, making him look a bit like Diglett. So it was high time to add some more facial features to make this pseudo-Pokemon looking creature look a bit more like a troll. The process of making Baby Troll was quite similar to making Mama Troll, with the exception that every detail was a bit smaller and adding them was a bit more fiddly-diddly. So I didn't stray too far away from the design of his mama, but I wanted the face to have a little bit more of an enthusiastic look to it. And I just couldn't help myself but to give him a little piece of hair pointing right upwards, making him look like the definition of a doofus. Since Baby Troll is gonna be sitting down, I made some legs that I gave the same shoe design as his mama, before attaching them to the lower part of his body and adding the final details to the legs as well as the shoes. I used cosplay instead of super sculpt before making all the clothes, and pretty much every detail I thought would run the risk of being broken off. And the reason for that is that cosplay is a bit flexible when it's baked, which is perfect if you're someone like me who has a tendency to break things, like this or that. Since Baby Troll is gonna be holding on to his mama's tail, I made him a pair of tiny hands that I attached to the end of the arms. And when those were in place, the final thing to do was to make mama's tail. And to make the tail, I wrapped some clay around a piece of aluminum wire that I tried to smooth out to the best of my ability. I poked a rough hair shape to the end of the tail before adding some thinner lines with a knife. And when the tail was done, the only thing left to do was to attach it to the hands of Baby Troll. And then Baby and Mama Troll was done, so it was time to make something for them to stand on. I had the perfect piece of XPS foam for the base, and by perfect I mean the length and the width, but the depth was about 50% too much. But after about 59.3 knife slices, the base was finally cleft in twain.
Hooray!
I like it when the sides of the base feel like they're a part of the diorama, so I started to nibble away some pieces of foam to give the sides more of a rocky appearance. But you can't make fake rock without a real rock, so I grabbed my favorite rock and I started to poke until the sides were done. You know, I might have said some time ago that you can't make fake rock without a real rock. Well, the plan is to turn these little pieces of bark into some rock, so I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't listen to me. Of course, this diorama wouldn't be complete without some extra mushrooms. Actually, you know what? I kinda want one over here instead. I decided to glue down some dirt with quick-drying putty instead of glue. For reasons unbeknownst to me, but oh well. And here's the dirt that I was talking about. It's basically a mix of some ground up bark and some other ground up things that I found out in nature. And when the entire base had been covered with it, then it was done. Well, then everything was built and sculpted and stuff, but I happen to have some cleaning up to do. But yeah, you know what time it is. It is time to I started to paint the base, or perhaps dab some paint on the base is more accurate. I don't know why, but for some reason I keep using this goopy brown color from a brand called Amsterdam. It's so goopy, it's impossible to paint with it. The worst part is that I've bought it twice. Amsterdam, this is not even a real word. When the brown color had dried, then I proceeded to dry brush some highlights onto the entire thing. And you know what? That Amsterdam color isn't too bad once it's dried. Or is it? You know, I was incredibly excited about the way the rocks turned out. And even though I like to make rocks out of XPS foam, I do think I'll be making more bark rock in the future. I painted up the death cap mushrooms with their signature red hat, as well as adding some orange highlights on the sides before painting the tiny white dots on the top. And when the base had been painted, then it was time to add some greenery to make it look a bit more like a forest and a bit less like the charred remains of a forest fire. And so I started to sprinkle on a bit of green flock here and there to my heart's desire. And after the first layer of the dark green flock, then I sprinkled on some lighter green flock to get a little bit of color variation. Safe to say all this sprinkling got me some green fingers. But oh well. Then the base was done, so let's paint Mama Troll. I decided that a dark brown base coat would be a good starting point, because I knew I wanted to paint the skin to look quite orangey. And since it's such a big and important part of the model, I decided to take my sweet time, so I used a fair amount of a technique called stippling, because I like how it creates texture by only using paint. And I also glazed in some color variations here and there. And of course the same principles was applied to the head. I kind of like trolls only having white eyes without the iris or the pupil. It kind of balances out the cuteness of their big nose. I painted the individual parts of Mama Troll's ragtaggedy clothes with some different colors before dry brushing some highlights to really make the textures of the clothes pop out. I was thinking about painting the hair grey at first, but I settled on painting it a more dark blonde or perhaps a very light brown color. Then I painted up the rock knife to look reasonably rockish with a whole bunch of highlights and tiny lines in different shades of grey. The shoe painting was quite straightforward. I just dry brushed on some highlights until they looked kinda dirty, and then painted the threads with a beige color. I wanted the sack to look a bit more leathery, so I applied some brown wash before giving it a healthy amount of dry brushing to highlight all the raised areas. As told by the tales, the trolls loved their gold, so the final thing to paint was all the bracelets and all of the other jewelry. And of course paint the mushroom. Yeah, I forgot, the mushroom of course. And then Mama Troll was done and looking kinda nice, but I realized something quite unfortunate. I had made her sack hanging down below her feet, which meant that she wouldn't be able to stand properly on the base. So I had to improvise a little bit. And I figured the easiest way would be to dig a little hole in the base for the sack. And that kinda worked out, so this will be our little secret, don't tell anyone. Okay, and then the final thing to do was to paint Baby Troll. And you better believe that this was just like painting Mama Troll, but just a light edition. So instead of rambling through all of the colors one more time, I think I just want to take the time and say thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video, and a big hello to all my new subscribers that showed up after the last video, which was the big bot bash. There were a couple of you, so hello, thank you. If you liked the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and perhaps comment if you have complaints or something. Oh well, anyway, little Baby Troll is done, so until the next time, be kind to yourself and others around you, and I will see you again really soon. Here are the final results.